first, I would give an overview of my system, followed by I'll talk about the data collection. I'll talk about what are some of these taboos, and then I would get in, because we are using dictionaries, I'll get into what dictionaries we are using, and then go over the methodology and results, and some of the limitations, and the future work planned for this study. So before we get into even the overview, this is what might be a taboo post, which I just wrote down just now while I was sitting there. So you might, while I'm talking, you might actually post this on a confession post, right? So this is sort of the post, which is kind of taboo, because particularly the names. If you put in the names and you post it on your Facebook, or forget LinkedIn or Twitter, but even Facebook, it might cause a problem, because even your advisor might be in your Facebook, right? So the first step obviously is to collect anonymous posts and label them. So we had undergrad research assistants labeling the posts. So this is the first data set which we used. This is Facebook Confessions database. The box on the left, you see that's a tiny URL link where a user can go in and feed in the anonymous post. So basically this looks just like a regular Facebook page. The difference being that the post doesn't come by your name, but rather by the name of the confession board. The other data set which we used is Yak Yak. I guess most of you might have heard about it. It's very popular in college campuses. It's a mobile app where people can post anonymously, and the number of characters is 200, so similar to Twitter, while the Facebook Confessions didn't really have a character limit. The next step is using the crowdsourced dictionaries for word2vec. So we used two dictionaries, Urban Dictionary and Luke. Urban Dictionary, most of you have used it, it's fun, but it's primarily crowdsourced dictionaries with a lot of slang terms. It was developed in 1999. And Luke is a very popular dictionary/tool, very common in social science for doing emotion labeling. Like, is this a positive emotion? So these are the words for positive emotions. These are the words for negative emotion. These are the words referring to oneself. And of course, the last step is evaluating the classification accuracy of the post using grid search. So I'll get into my data set, right? And so the first data set which we used was, we used 50 university confession pages. We collected about 100,000 posts, and 4,000 of them were hand labeled. And 32% of the posts were taboo. So I showed you a post at the beginning of what a taboo post might look like. So our labelers found among those 4,000 posts, 32% had taboos in them. So we used this data set in our paper in SIGCHI, and it was mostly a statistical, analysis. So yeah, this is example of some of the confession pages. So yeah. So taboo topics are like topics which one is uncomfortable to talk about with people. So that's sort of the simple definition. Something which one wouldn't even talk to with friends, probably something which one would post anonymously, talk to therapists. So we had 9 taboo categories: sex, drugs, mental health, etc. So this is one of the posts in which this is one of the posts which was marked as sex. And one thing to remember is that not all posts which are about romance is related to a post of sex, because this is in particular when one talks about sex as a taboo, and that's why, as the previous speaker was speaking, that's why the annotation is very expensive. Both the undergraduate research assistants were social science students, and that's why we didn't give it to crowdsourced workers, because this kind of labeling is kind of very kind of painstaking. This is a post from the protected groups. So protected groups are like things about racial minorities, LGBTQ communities, etc. This is another post which you can see that it's clearly something taboo. And finally, this is a post on mental health. This was particularly a difficult post to code. If you read the post, or at least parts of it, you will see that it talks about suicide, it talks about drug abuse, and it talks about mental health. So because we used mostly like one label for each post, one has to read sort of the entire context to understand that this is the primary thing which we are talking about is mental health here. So I talked about what is taboos, and then what is not taboos. So a post like this is not a taboo, because you would often find this post on regular social media, and this isn't like really taboo. So these are posts also found in confession boards. So now I mentioned briefly why is it hard to label. One other thing you would see that because we are looking at student communities, they're often sarcastic. So when they say my life sucks, it might be really true, or it might be they are just making fun of something. So you have to clearly look at the entire post and all the context and how this user is trying to say that. And this was another post, just like the previous one, where there is a conflict between whether you should label it as mental health or whether you should label it as death. No wonder sex and protected groups were the most talked about topics. So when we used just plain TF-IDF vectors, we found good, true negatives. No wonder, because 68% of the posts were not taboos. So by default, the classifier tries to make it not a taboo. But the weak spot was the false negatives. So at this point, we wondered, how do we solve this problem? Like, why are we getting bad accuracy? And what is special about this post, right? Like, how is it different from someone posting on Twitter, someone posting on Facebook? And slangs, that was sort of the answer. Lots of internet language. If you just look at any post which is from the social media, they're like full of jargons students use as compared to something even in Twitter, which has jargons, but even sort of well-defined jargons. And these are, as these are across different universities, sometimes they are jargons limited to those universities. So the solution we found was using Urban Dictionary. So this is a crowdsourced dictionary, as I mentioned. Initially, it was a parody of dictionary.com, but now if you look at some of the responses, it has, I guess it has more words covered even than Merriam-Webster, or at least dictionary.com. It has even your names covered. So even if you search with your name, in Urban Dictionary, you would find a meaning for that name, whether or not it's relevant or even useful. The solution was not in the meaning of the Urban Dictionary. We found the solution in the related work section. So if you look up mental health, and then you have the related words regarding to mental health. So that's what we used. So when in our first pass we used just TF-IDF plain, and then we looked at what are the top vectors for each class across there's different taboo categories. And then we looked up Urban Dictionary, like I created a scraper to go to Urban Dictionary and find out the set of related words for each of those top vectors. So when we used Urban Dictionary, some of the words which got added into the model are this. And even if you search Urban Dictionary now, you can see like if for some of those, so these were not words. When you search for bodily functions, this wouldn't come up. But if you look at the pose classified as bodily function, and then you look at the top TF-IDF words, vectors for those things, then and do an Urban Dictionary search on them, then you would find that. The second dictionary which we used was Luke. So Luke is a very popular dictionary used in social science, designed by James Pennebaker from Texas in 2001. It gives sort of labeling based on different categories. So initially he used to look at patients and look at how they converse. So like people who are depressed often try to talk about themselves more than others. So by using that, he built up a dictionary back in 2001, and it has been further modified and added on to. So it has 64 basic word categories. So some of these categories you can see: health, positive emotion, religious. So yeah, I come back to the final methodology again. So once we did add on both the Urban Dictionary and Luke, we found that our accuracy levels increased a lot. Another thing we wanted to also focus on, that the accuracy levels increased even in posts which were very less represented. So some of these posts like mental health, just simply mental health, were very uncommon, but we wanted to have decent accuracy even for them, some of those posts. We also used oversampling because only 30% of the posts were taboo. So we oversampled around 1.5 times our posts, so that we sort of get a more high representative of taboo posts as compared to regular non-taboo posts. So this was the false negative and positive in the first pass we did. So you can see that I was willing to get some false positives. So false positives are posts which are marked as some category, but they don't belong in that category. And false negatives mostly are posts which are just marked as non-taboo. And because so many of the posts were non-taboo, the default classifier tries to put most of the posts as non-taboo. So I sacrificed a bit in the true, false negative to get a false positive to get much lower false negative values. So at this stage, I was wondering, like, will this scale beyond Facebook confessions? Because this is just one very contextual confession post, and will this model do better, work, or even do better in other confession systems? And the solution was Yak Yak. It's almost 2 years old now, and we collected data around this time. So this is something like Yak Yak. So people can simply upvote or downvote some of those posts, and when a post gets more than 5 downvotes, it gets removed. So some of the posts in Yak Yak which we labeled, um, so you can see they are shorter in length as compared to um, the first few Facebook posts, but still sort of representative of the same sort of issues. So we found accuracy of 70.36 on Yak Yak, and more importantly, on the most prevalent taboo top categories, which was sex and protected categories, which accounted for around 60% of the taboo posts, we got more than 85%. So basically, if we have more data labeled in a particular category, we would be able to achieve um, high accuracy in those systems. So one of the limitations is that we looked only at American universities. So we plan to go further than that. The data set was fairly small. It was only 4,000 data points. And so for this paper, we only looked at the posts and not on the comments on those posts, which is an useful analysis to do as well, as we found in our previous Ikai paper. So the future work which I'm working on is looking at Indian Facebook confession boards. Some speaker was mentioning just some time back about what happens when you look at posts in English in different languages. Like they were giving the example of people in China speaking English as compared to in Germany. And one interesting thing about Indian FCBs are people often use some vernacular language. The post might be mostly in English, but people often use some vernacular language, and often more than one vernacular language. So posts can have 3 different languages used. So that's what code switching is about. And another interesting thing is different slangs. That's the most important thing. So Urban Dictionary is not going to work. So that's something which is important to look at. What are some of the top slang terms in those contexts, and try to use that. We only used regular classifiers. We didn't use any kind of sentiment analysis, so that's also there in the car park. And use topic modeling, as that can be useful for because that was can be useful for mental health workers. Like, what are the topics students are talking about anonymously? So overall, we had 72% accuracy across all classes. We got low false negatives, and this was potentially useful for mental health workers and university services. And for a time, I was collaborating with CAPS, which was the Northwestern mental health services, to talk to them about what kind of systems would they find useful. So give my acknowledgements to some of the people who are not the co-authors, but who helped in forming of the ideas, and the research assistants who helped label the data. Yeah.
Perhaps I missed it. First of all, really nice talk, thank you. And what was the classifier you used for which you got that boost with the Urban Dictionary?
Yes, I had actually, I guess I have it in the extra slides section. Okay, sorry.
I mean, it makes sense that the boost would happen, but I was just curious what the features were and what the classifier was.
For the boost?
For the Urban Dictionary one.
So what we did was use TF-IDF along with Urban Dictionary and Luke. So we used a vectorizer, the regular TF-IDF vectorizer, and along with the regular TF-IDF vectorizer, I modeled a vectorizer for Urban Dictionary and Luke using count vectorizer. So using all this three vectorized scheme, I kind of labeled, sorry, not labeled, found used word2vec for converting those posts.
Gotcha. You use word to work. Okay.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure if you were saying about the oversampling part, but yes, we just oversampled the posts in the Taboo post. So only 32% posts were Taboo. So we sort of multiplied it by some times without much overfitting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Could you go over how you made the decision to oversample but not to multi-label?
So one, the simple answer is that this was already a labeled data set which we used in a previous work. And there we wanted to look at the top posts, the top label for each kind of post. So that's the reason we didn't multi-label. And that's sort of the plan to multi-label right now. And what was your other question?
Just the oversampling, if you were going to multi-label, would you do sample splitting, where you just duplicate the samples with the extra labels, one each, or would there be another method that you would use for it?
We used SMOT, so it's simply just sampling, like if you just doubling it, or just 1 point, like just taking just adding a random subset of the initial training set onto the training set. Like, so if the initial training set is X, you add 0.5x of those Taboo posts again into the classifier.
Sure. Thank you.